Okay, well, it is 10:02, so good morning, everyone. Um, I am calling this meeting to order at 10:02, um, and I want to welcome everybody to our, I was going to say April meeting for some reason, to our June meeting. My name is Maddie Bizzurdo. I am the Director of Business Operations for the City of Bowie, and I am currently the Chair of the BIAC. As Leah has been mentioning, please put your name and affiliation in the chat so that we can have an accurate recording of the attendance. All right, we're going to go quickly on to our second item on the agenda. We are going to be approving the meeting summary of April 16. So I know that Leah sent it out as part of all the information sent out to us. If you haven't had an opportunity to read it, I am going to give you a couple of minutes, or maybe less. I don't know. It's up to you to kind of review it, and then we will approve it.
And Madam Chair, while everyone is reviewing that, I will ask, I see someone in the chat with a phone number. If they could also, I don't know if they have ability to put their name in the chat or come off mute and let us know who's the 2023 number so we have that accurate attendance. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, this is Francisco Machia with the DC Department of Energy and Environment. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't able to get my identifier. My WebEx is not working.
Oh, no problem. Thanks.
All righty. Are there any changes that anyone would like to make to the meeting summary of April 16th? Hearing none, we will then approve the meetings. Excuse me, I keep thinking meeting minutes because I just came off another meeting like that. The April summary. All right, let's move on. We're going quick, and this is good because I know we have a little bit of time constraint today. We are now going to be moving on to the third item of the agenda, which is the jurisdiction updates and roundtable peer exchange. This item we haven't had on the agenda for a while. For this roundtable exchange, we're going to be asking the framing question, which is, what are the current methods of approaches your jurisdiction has in addressing energy insecurity? But before we do that, I know that Leah and some of the staff from COG developed a primer for us that they're going to put up, I'm sure, on the screen and review for us, and then we'll go to answering the question. So Leah, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So along with the roundtable framing question, we've developed this primer that includes some basic information about energy affordability to help ground the discussion and the Q&A moving forward. This piece is not comprehensive in that it is a introductory document that we can use to build out this topic based on our internal research, as well as what we'd like is input from BIAC, as well as at the policy level. So the primer is outlined into 3 sections: definitions, utility shutoff thresholds, and legislation landscape. The definition section includes a few basic terms. The energy justice area typically includes a range of terms, but these basic 4 terms on the primer are the main ones used in practice as well as in academic circles, which you'll hear from Dr. Sonia Carley. The energy justice field, or as it's also referred to as energy equity, is integral to a just energy transition as it addresses fairness and equity concerns. It is also multidimensional and connects to energy burden, which refers to the expense of energy expenditures relative to overall household income. Energy insecurity, which refers to the hardships households face with when meeting basic household needs. And energy democracy. A lot of times, you energy democracy is not a new term, but most of what we may have heard in our work across climate and energy is energy burden, but energy democracy is essentially the notion that communities should have a say and agency in shaping their energy future. So some additional terms that we could also include when we build out this piece is energy poverty, which refers to a lack of access to energy itself, and perhaps an energy transition, which I mentioned before, which is just a transition away from the fossil fuel economy. And so hopefully you've gotten a chance to read through some of it for today, but we'll briefly go through the next sections and then do the roundtable check-in. Thank you. And so Maddie Stoddard will go through the utility threshold section.
Yes. So when we were looking into energy burden, we were curious what the threshold is for utilities when they're looking to shut off a customer's power. This information wasn't easily accessible, especially because it can be very dependent on the utility company and on each customer's situation. But we were able to find the legal requirements for DC, Maryland, and Virginia in order for them to be able to do so. So in DC, utilities need to offer payment plans if a customer is behind, and they must provide 15 days notice prior to shut off. In Maryland, the bill must be outstanding for more than 3 months, exceed the customer's security deposit, as well as be more than $100, and they also need to provide notice 2 weeks before. And then in Virginia, similarly, the customer's account must be more than 60 days overdue, and utilities must provide non-payment notice after each missed payment, as well as provide payment plans or areas where assistance is available. So they're all fairly similar, but they have slight differences. And I will pass it off to Robert to go into legislation.
And Robert, before you start, could you make the primer bigger
Sure,
for folks?
try to stop share for a moment and then reshare.
Thank you.
Okay. I can't really, when I do full screen, it doesn't want to share larger, so I'll just have to do it in the regular browser window and just zoom in from there. So, how's that? Better?
Perfect. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, so we took a look at the legislative landscape for DC, Maryland, and Virginia regarding energy affordability. And there's a bit of a range. So all the states have some legislation that provide incentives for energy efficiency programs, which can reduce costs overall. But the glaring omission is that for the most part, the region doesn't have protections against third-party price hikes for ratepayers. Maryland does. That took effect January of last year, but that's the only price control for ratepayers against the shocks that have been coming from the increases in utility costs. So there's some room for improvement across the region in that regard. Like I said, there are some efficiency programs that can reduce costs, but nothing that protects against price shocks except for in Maryland. And then we have some more information on disconnection moratoriums that Maddie will get into. Maddie?
Yes. So I don't want to read all of this list to you guys, but in terms of moratorium, every state has a few protections. And so starting with DC, the most notable disconnection prevention at the moment was that they recently passed an emergency legislation on March 31st that's prevented utilities from disconnecting customers for the next 90 days if customers owe less than $1,000, and this is coming from the recent price hikes that DC residents are experiencing. And then regularly throughout the year, utilities cannot disconnect customers if there is an extreme temperature in the forecast, and so they also cannot disconnect the day before an extreme temperature, and they classify that as the weather being over 95 degrees or 32 degrees or below. DC also protects residents that have medical emergencies, so they cannot shut off power if it will be life-threatening to a customer. And moving on to Maryland, they have similar temperatures where protections where if the forecast will be over 95 or below 32 as well, they cannot shut off their power for the next 72 hours. And then similarly with Virginia, they also have the temperature protection of above 92 degrees or below 32. And then across all three states, we see that utility companies need to make constant contact with customers before they can shut off, and all of them are required to provide payment plan options or assistance to help customers. And I believe all of them also restrict shutoffs on weekends, state holidays, or the day before a holiday.
And before we move on to the last section, I think, Al, is that a question? Is the DC budget that is before the council or third supplier reforms? If you could clarify
It's
the
not a
comment.
question, it's a statement.
Okay. So in the DC budget, that is before the council or third party supplier reforms. Okay. Got it. And then the last section of the primer is just links to the energy assistance programs or LIHEAP programs within by state, basically DC being, of course, local and state level. Those are the direct links to the LIHEAP program. So that is the primer. Again, we do hope that you will provide comments and sections or comments or input on the primer and this sort of new developing area of research for us. We haven't yet developed something official on it, but please reach out to us in terms of more information you'd like us to provide. And then we can now get into the roundtable exchange addressing the framing question. And so, Robert, if you can bring that up again on the agenda so that we can, local governments or members can see the question.
Yes. So if we can address the different jurisdictions, what they do. So let's start with Virginia local governments. Does anybody in Virginia have any special programs or would like to answer this question? Now, I know that tomorrow's a holiday.
No, Maddie, I raised my hand. You don't see it?
Oh,
Maybe
I'm
it didn't
sorry, I
go up.
can't see it. Yeah, so.
Oh, okay. So in dealing with that, I think that we're doing several different things. Like one, we're creating a program called CHAMPS, where we're trying to do affordable housing and give them ways to improve their energy efficiency. So that's a fairly large program. And another one is that maybe we don't consider, but I launched a program called Stay Cool Alex. And we're really looking at urban heat island impacts and how we know that even though you say like there's an overall tree canopy and et cetera, but there are areas of the city that definitely are too hot. So part of this is to, one, mitigate in a more immediate level how to reduce that impact, but then on a longer term level to really target those areas and make sure that's included in all of our budgeting and project proposals to try to deal with that. We're also trying to put solar on more of our affordable housing buildings as well. So I think those are three prongs at the moment that we're working on.
Okay. Unfortunately, I can't see everybody. So if anybody else has their hand raised, please feel free to.
For Fairfax County, Virginia, is Allison Homer, Office of Environmental and Energy Coordination. In addition to the cooling assistance program from our Department of Family Services, which is the LIHEAP program, Jody White is on the line to answer any questions about that. There's also the Senior Cool Care, also administered by Department of Family Services. And then our office created a program called AC Rescue, which serves residents who are unable to be served by the other two programs. So we have no age restrictions, no timing restrictions, a higher income cap, so up to 80% AMI. So we provide free air conditioning equipment and repairs to residents who are in need, up to 80% AMI. And I'll let others chime in.
Anybody else in Virginia?
I can go next.
I-
Oh, am I interrupting anyone here?
No, we can jump to Maryland. That's okay.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I
Well,
speak for
first,
Howard
was there
County.
anyone else from
Oh, sorry.
Virginia? I thought I
Yeah.
heard. Sorry, thought I heard.
Yeah,
someone.
sorry. This is Drew Spilsman
Okay,
from
thank you.
Arlington County. If I can go before we move on to Maryland, but just wanted to mention that Arlington's Department of Human Services administers those same state level programs that you all were just mentioning, and we recently launched a program called our Home Energy Hub that's trying to connect residents with more resources to learn more about options and how to implement energy efficiency initiatives. And it also highlights those cost assistance programs that our Department of Human Services runs. We're trying to connect more residents with those existing resources as well.
I apologize before to Britta. Anybody else in Virginia? Okay. So let's jump to Maryland and then we'll go to DC. Britta, if you want to mention.
Okay, so I work for Howard County, Maryland, for the Office of Community Sustainability. We are in the process of developing a community solar program that would be county owned and county operated, and that would be providing electricity at a 25% discount to LMI residents. We cannot restrict the subscriptions to only residents of our county, but we can, of course, heavily advertise it in our county. So probably at least the majority of subscribers will be coming from our county. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Anybody else from Maryland? I don't. Leah, has anybody raised their hand? Do you see?
I am not seeing any more raised hands.
Well, then I'll
Okay.
quickly mention here in Bowie, we have a couple of things that we're doing. One of the things that I'm working with directly with BG&E and Exelon is on, anything related to outages and anything related to cutting power, energy, and I work very close with them so that we can help out our residents. Secondly, we do have a retrofit program that we run. It used to be only for senior citizens, but we have recently expanded it, and now I believe it starts in the next few weeks, and we'll be taking applications, and that's for Bowie residents. And we retrofit up to $15,000 per home. And then the final thing is we do have a it's not a official, but we have an energy emergency fund, and we will open that up to, if we find that there are folks out there that might need our assistance. And so that fund is there available for our residents. And that's pretty much what we do in Bowie. We'd like to do more, but there's only so much resources that we have. All right. Now, anybody else in Maryland like to share?
I'm not seeing any hands, but Allison Homer from Fairfax mentioned that they also have an energy efficiency work such as Energy Compass, in addition to Cooling Assistance, Senior Cool Care, and AC Rescue, which AC Rescue, we featured that in our 2026 Environmental Justice Toolkit. And someone from Maryland did raise their hand. So if you wanted to come off mute. And
Hi, can you hear me? Oh,
Yes, we
sorry.
can.
Oh, okay. Like, did I mute myself or mute you guys? I'm not used to this program. Sorry. My name is Sheena. I'm with Mahoney County, but I'm actually in the Department of Environmental Protection, and I'm trying to figure out how I got added to the group call because someone in my team added me. Because this is not my wheelhouse, but I do know that at least in the county, we have um, a lot of programs that we have to help with energy and security are state programs. And they work off of like there's the program at the state level that will help people if they're at the point where their utilities are going to be shut off, and the state provide money for that. The county has additional money on top of that, but it always runs out. Um, I know that the utilities now, but this may just be a utility-wide thing, are offering extended payment plans for. I know Pepco does, even WSSC, even though that's not energy related, but WSSC does as well, for any customers that are facing shut off or any kind of financial issues at the moment. They do offer that as well. Um, and I'm going to try to get some more information and I'll type it in the chat, but I don't deal with that, but that's just knowledge that I already have personally and from work.
Thank you. PG&E does the same thing because they're part of the Exelon family with Pepco. So they also do provide payment plans as well. Is there anybody else from Maryland? Okay. How about DC? Does anybody from DC? Al, maybe? Anybody? Leah, do you see any hands?
I do not see any hands. So maybe, they can type it in the chat. We are about 5 minutes late. So I know Dr. Carly has a hard stop. So if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, we can move forward to
Alrighty.
the next agenda item. And again, you do have the chat available if you wanted to add to the chat, as well as the primer, any information that we perhaps may have should include mischaracterized in some way. I know, Al, you had additional comments, so please provide additional comments, but we can move forward.
Okay, wonderful. So our next agenda is a presentation from Dr. Sonia Carly, co-director at the Energy Justice Lab, vice provost for climate science, policy, and action, presidentially distinguished professor of energy policy and city planning, University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Carly will discuss the prevalence of energy insecurity and give a comprehensive evaluation of the opportunities to address energy insecurity. After her presentation, we will take questions. So, Dr. Carly, thank you for coming, and please.
Wonderful, thank you. Can you hear me?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, great. I'm gonna give this share a try and hope that it doesn't ask for too many new settings.
And we have it just in case, so just
Yeah. I think I'll need you. Well, let me give this one more try. No, I think I'll need you to pull it up. Sorry, it asked me if I would quit WebEx, so I don't want to quit. If you don't mind sharing, that'd be great.
yes. So Robert, if you can bring that up for us, thanks.
Yep, I'll do that. Just give me one moment. PowerPoint is in the middle of crashing, so just let me restart it and I'll get that shared.
And thank you everyone for your patience. Actually, we've been having internet issues all week, all week at work here. So yeah, technology is not all that reliable at times.
Sometimes hard. I was able to just finally get it. I
Oh,
bypassed
great.
some of the settings. So, and you can see this just fine.
Yes. Yep.
Great. Okay. Okay. Then I will get started. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all about energy and security and affordability. And I'll just start by noting that this is based on research that's coming out of our lab. This is the Energy Justice Lab, which I co-direct with Dr. David Kaniski, who I understand has joined you all previously to talk about some related challenges. And this is just a snapshot of our website at the Energy Justice Lab. So what I will chat with you all about in this time together is first identifying what is energy and security and understanding some of the dimensions of energy and security, then talking about the incidence and determinants of this challenge. Briefly, I'll talk about energy prices at present and how it's contributing to the affordability challenge. And then I will end with a discussion of policy opportunities within this space. And to cut to the chase, I think that there are many different regulatory and policy opportunities that exist, many of which you all just mentioned in brief. But I'll just focus on a few in the short amount of time that we have today. So energy and security and poverty. I know that we also discussed definitions at the beginning of the call. I generally talk about energy insecurity and poverty interchangeably, and generally it refers to when households are struggling to pay their energy bills and to have the sufficient amount of heating or cooling that they need to survive. We know from recent government data that were released through the Residential Energy Consumption Survey that each year in the United States, approximately 1 in 3 households experience energy insecurity. Again, that is, experience or difficulty paying their energy bills. Now, this stat is interesting. It is more acute now than 4 years ago or 5 years ago when the last residential energy consumption survey was fielded. So this rate of incidence is going up over time. The government also, just a few weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, the Energy Information Administration released new data on utility disconnections. So when I think about energy and security, I often think of it as a spectrum. One might first struggle to pay their bills, they then receive a notification for disconnection, and then they are disconnected. So I think of disconnections as the most severe form of energy insecurity. And these data show that in 2024 alone, approximately 13.4 million households had their electricity shut off due to non-payment of their bill. When you add in gas as well, then the number is about 15 million households total between electricity and gas. Now, this is quite interesting to me and our team at the Energy Justice Lab. We've been tracking utility disconnections over time through the Utility Disconnection Dashboard, where we essentially scrape data from the website from across all of the states that gather these data when the utility companies essentially report them to the Public Utility Commission. And we hold all these data at our dashboard. And this new recent number from EIA basically suggests that this problem of utility disconnections is about 10 times in magnitude greater than all of the data that are publicly available before this point. So a much, much more severe problem than we could have fathomed before these data were available. When a household struggles to pay their energy bills, or even when their power is disconnected, they can't charge devices, which means they can't charge phones or computers, which limits their ability to seek help and even to communicate with the utility companies themselves. They can't run refrigerators, which means they can't keep healthy and perishable food in their homes. They can't run electronic medical devices that they may rely on for their lives, such as an oxygen concentrator, and they may struggle to keep their bodies cool or warm depending on the weather, which can lead to a variety of health outcomes, both mental and physical health outcomes. And in the extreme but not at all rare case, it can lead to the incidence of death. Now, we know from a robust body of literature on energy and security, and I would say a growing body of literature as well, focusing on the medical side and the health side, we know that in developmental and educational side, we know that households that struggle with energy insecurity are more likely to experience long-term poverty, acute and chronic health conditions, and the children specifically within the home are more likely to be hospitalized, consume fewer calories, and have developmental delays in school as a result of experiencing this form of trauma. Now, what is energy insecurity? I gave you a definition, but I think that we often, when talking about energy insecurity, rely on a single metric, which is a metric of energy burden, and that's essentially how much of your total income do you spend on energy. And I think that while this metric is helpful for identifying households in need, for example, I think that it's not telling the entire story of what a household is actually experiencing when they're in this state. So here I'm giving just a spectrum of sorts, if you will, where on one hand, there's full consumption on the right-hand side, where a household is able to consume or will, no matter how much energy costs, will consume as much as they need. Potentially, you might have vulnerable members in your house, for example, infants or older individuals who can't necessarily deal with the heat as well and can't sweat it out. So you have full consumption on one side and you have complete curtailment on the other side, which is when a household either doesn't run their air conditioning unit when it's hot outside, or they might just heat a single room of the house, or they might not have energy access at all. Here is just a few other kind of terms and concepts that go along with these two extremes of curtailment and full consumption. On the right-hand side, when you're fully consuming, you have a very high energy burden. That is a high proportion of your income going towards energy, and you're also putting yourself at higher risk of debt and disconnection because you're essentially accruing arrears over time. And on the curtailment side, when a household is severely curtailing what they consume, they might also be more likely to use different coping strategies to get by, such as financial strategies or not paying for things such as food and healthcare, and they might keep dangerous temperatures in their home. Now, a variety of these different techniques, such as coping strategies, can also be incredibly dangerous. So not only is it dangerous essentially to accrue debt and to be disconnected, but it's also dangerous to engage in other strategies, such as running space heaters in your home in order to keep warm, not turning your heat on, but running space heaters, or using your car essentially as a form of heat and sitting in your car and running the car, but putting yourself at compromised of risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, or essentially a severe curtailment, as you can see in this third article with heat beat, of leading to death because your body organs and functions don't necessarily work. Now, what is the incidence and the determinants of energy insecurity? This is a question that has motivated a lot of research that we've conducted at the Energy Justice Lab. And I'll just walk you through a few of our repeated and core findings when asking these questions. Now here, this is pulling from 3 separate articles from our team, some of which are based on surveys that we've conducted, specifically surveys with a representative sample of low-income households all across the United States. And others of this is based on actual utility disconnection data based on what we have at our utility disconnection dashboard. So what do we find? Who's disconnected most often? We find that households of color relative to white households are significantly more likely to experience energy insecurity and to be disconnected. Specifically, the statistics that we've found are that Black households are 3 times more likely to be disconnected than white households, and Hispanic households are 4 times more likely to be disconnected. We find that households with young children in the home who reside in the home are more likely to be disconnected by also a factor of 3. Now, why this is incredibly dangerous is that in some places across the United States, children can also be removed from the home by child services if the home is deemed not a habitable space for the children. We also find that households where an individual relies on an electronic medical device is more likely to be disconnected. And when living in housing conditions that are deficient or inefficient, for example, if there's gaps in the window or gaps between the windows and the wall or poor insulation, this leads to a higher incidence of disconnection. We've also fielded a survey in which we asked low-income households, again, this is households that are within 200% of the federal poverty line. This is a representative sample. We asked them how they cope, essentially, when they're energy insecure. And what we find is, first, that more than half, 55% specifically, of all low-income households engage in both financial and behavioral coping strategies. Most of them engage in both of these strategies at once. And the most risky strategies, which are the ones in dark blue, are far more common than the less risky categories or coping strategies, which are in light blue. So we know, looking at these data, that 27% of all low-income households accrue debt on a regular basis, and 26% engage in temperature strategies. Now, these are all kind of cold weather strategies to stay warm, such as running a space heater, as I noted before, but also burning trash in your home, or running an oven, essentially, and flaring the oven or opening the oven door for space heat, or running a dryer and putting somebody behind the dryer by disconnecting the dryer vent in order to warm one's skin. We know that 18% of all low-income households strategically balance their bills, that is, kind of paying down one bill one month and another bill the next, to put themselves right at the margins of some kind of consequence, for example, eviction or disconnections. And we know that 17% forego expenses on food and healthcare in order to pay utility bills. Now, less common are things such as seeking out government assistance, bill assistance, for example. 6% of all low-income households report that they seek help from the utility company, such as calling the utility company and asking for payment plans. And 10% tap their personal networks. Now, our team has also done research on durable medical equipment, electronic medical devices, for example, because of what we found was slightly puzzling, or we just wanted to dig in more deeply as to why it is that households that rely on these devices are more likely to be disconnected. And what we find through a series of relatively simple calculations is that running these devices, and here in this paper we focus on the 11 most common devices that exist, but running them can increase one's energy bill by several $100s per year. Just to take an example here, California's, one resides in California and they use an oxygen concentrator for an average amount of time, it increases their bill by about $350. Now, these are maybe inconsequential for some households. They may be able to absorb these costs relatively easily, but for other households, that additional $350, or in other states, $200, may be the difference between being disconnected or not. We also know through our data looking at utility disconnections in the state of California that weather patterns are very important. So in hotter climates, hotter weather leads to more disconnections, and in colder climates, colder weather leads to more disconnections. Of course, there's an underlying story here of climate change with increased incidence of extreme weather, including in what we call the shoulder months, essentially in the fall and in the spring, when households aren't always protected with utility disconnection protections. That's where we're seeing an increased incidence in recent years of utility disconnections. We also know from our research that once a household is struggling to pay their energy bills, and especially if they fall behind and end up disconnected, that this typically then becomes a perpetual cycle. So in our survey work, we typically find that over half of all households who have been disconnected repeatedly. As I'm showing here, just with this simple schematic, you struggle to pay your bills, you're shut off. And as a result, you might have shut-off fees, you might have disconnection fees, reconnection fees, legal fees. You might lose everything in your refrigerator, for example. So you might have been behind on your bills by, let's say, just $50. But as a result of being disconnected, it might become hundreds of dollars due to these additional fees, which then leads a household to struggle to pay their energy bills. They might also be deemed or identified as risky by the utility company, and thereby might be more prone to receiving a shutoff in the future. Now, just a note, I mentioned that I would talk very briefly about affordability and energy prices at present. And here in this slide, I'm just giving a bit of background on some costs and some price statistics. So we know that energy prices have been rising quite significantly across the entire country over the past several years. There's variation in statistics that exist, but the best that I've heard is 30% on average over the past 5 years, but this is increasing at a nonlinear rate. So in the very recent years, these price increases are going up quite significantly. The estimate right now from the Energy Information Administration is that prices will go up an additional 8.5% this year. But we know even in just the first quarter of this year, in some markets, such as the PJM market where I'm located, we've seen massive increases in prices just essentially quarter over quarter from last year. To put this in context, the average residential electricity bill in the US in 2024 was $144, and this would then lead to a bill increase of $12 on average, but again, noting that in some places this percentage is much greater, such as the projections within the PJM market of about 40% increases in prices. So 12 may seem small again, but it might not be the amount that a household could absorb, but in some places this will be much, much larger. And this also does not account for gas. So let me turn then to policy opportunities. I'm posing these as opportunities because I think there's a lot of policies out there, as I'll show in a second, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity for improvement within these policies and an expanded mindset, if you will, of all of the different kinds of policy levers that different entities can pull. So here is one way of thinking about different policies. Here's the schematic I mentioned earlier, where a household first struggles to pay their bills, then receives a notice, and then is disconnected. And then on top of this, I'm essentially superimposing different policy interventions or regulatory interventions. And here on the bottom, I have more government-led interventions. And then on the top, I have more utility-led, though with the caveat that oftentimes it's governments that encourage the utilities or mandate the utilities to institute these different interventions. Just looking across the top, these are several different kinds of utility programs and payment plans, essentially. There's the standard payment plan where your bill is spread out over time. That's the smooth billing. But then there's other payment plans that are slightly more nuanced and slightly more administratively burdensome, such as the percentage of income payment plan, but also potentially a much bigger help for those households that are energy insecure. Now I'm going to focus in my time remaining on the blue visuals and just a few of these, but just thinking about it in terms of kind of this process diagram for energy insecurity. On the far left-hand side, I have interventions that I think are kind of preventative efforts. If you remember, I noted that once a household's energy insecure, they become perpetually energy insecure. So these are interventions that I think of as preventative to help a household avoid entering that state of energy insecurity or being disconnected. And this includes efforts such as weatherization, energy efficiency, customer-owned or community-shared distributed energy resources such as solar, for example, or storage, and can also include smart gadgets. And then along this spectrum, there's the opportunity for bill assistance to help households avoid entering the state of disconnection. And then there's disconnection protections also to help households avoid being disconnected. And there's also debt relief, which you could probably spread across this entire spectrum. But here I'll note that debt relief is especially helpful after a household has been disconnected and is accruing so many additional fees. Here's a different way of thinking about this schematic, and this is just more identifying the different kinds of policy interventions where we have preventative investments, temporary relief, and then long-term management to help households. And again, I'm just going to focus on a few of these. I'll focus on bill assistance, I'll focus on residential solar, and I'll focus on disconnection moratoria or protections. Starting with bill assistance, I'm going to focus just again in this brief time on LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, recognizing that also states and local jurisdictions also provide additional bill assistance support. Here's a map of LIHEAP that comes from Visualizing Energy, which I think is a really fabulous site for thinking about different energy challenges because it's all put into this really great visual form. So this is the most recent year that they produced LIHEAP data. It's 2021, but you can see that the distribution of LIHEAP is quite uneven across the states. And this is due to I would argue, a fairly complicated set of formulas that HHS puts together and that Congress then essentially tweaks in order to identify regions that are particularly cold and where there are a large proportion of low-income households that pay their energy bills. So you can see the distribution tends to skew towards colder weather states, and that's due to these kind of provisions within LIHEAP, the hold harmless provisions, essentially, where Congress does a tweaking as to how the funds are distributed. Now, I think that there are many challenges. LIHEAP is an incredible source of assistance for households all across the United States, but there are many challenges where I think that there are then opportunities, which I'll turn to next, for improving this program, and especially in the present moment of increasing incidents of extreme weather and extreme heat. So first, generally, LIHEAP is underfunded for the need. At most, 20% of households that are in need are able to access these funds in any given year. The process for allocation, I would argue, is fairly opaque and could be more transparent to the public. There's inconsistent annual funding, which is, of course, due to congressional budgets. And then funds are not always available year-round. So there are many states, essentially, LIHEAP is allocated in the fall, and there are many states that either entirely exhaust or exhaust about 70% of their total LIHEAP funds by the end of the winter season, which leaves very few funds remaining for some of these states in the summertime. And so with this increased incidence of heat, and increased need to run air conditioning, it's thereby all the more important that there are funds available during hot weather times as well. The formula is allocated by favoring cold weather states due to essentially the history of the inception of LIHEAP, and then that's reinforced over time, but that's despite these increased incidences of extreme heat events. And I would argue that there's insufficient consideration of all energy poverty factors in the state allocations, though again, this process is slightly opaque, so we don't necessarily know all of the data sources that go into administering the program. So opportunities here for enhancement, I think increasing appropriations is one to expand to more households, dispersing funds so that enough remain during the hottest months, modernizing the funding formula to give more equal weighting to hot weather conditions and hot weather states, and targeting outreach to households with particularly vulnerable household members, such as those with young children or those who rely on medical devices. Switching gears then, I'll talk about solar, and this, if you recall, this is one that I called a preventative measure. So our team recently published an article where the question was, can residential solar, reduce the incidence of energy insecurity? And essentially what we did is we found households all across the United States. We had a database of all households that in 2021 put residential solar on their roofs. And so we took those households and we essentially matched them one by one with households that did not put solar on the roofs, but looked identical to these solar households in every other way that we had available data for. And then we set both sets of households a survey in 2023. And the survey essentially asked questions about the incidence of energy insecurity. So whether people were struggling to pay their bills, whether they have received notices for disconnection and so forth, but then also a variety of other questions about how they procured their solar, whether it was through a loan or through other means. And here are the results just in simple graph form. We found that households with solar relative to households that look just like them, identical, but without solar, these households were 46% less likely to receive a notice for disconnection, 44% more likely to be able to pay their bills, 34% less likely to forego other expenses such as on food, 21% less likely to keep their home at an uncomfortable temperature, and 15% less likely to reduce their energy consumption. So fairly sizable results. And we find that it doesn't matter how this household was able to access the solar, whether it was subsidized, whether it was through a loan, or whether they paid entirely out of pocket, that these results held across all of these different situations. But we know that these technologies, such as residential solar, would most help these households who are energy insecure by lowering energy bills, but yet they are the least accessible to these same households. And I'll talk you through how, and I'll just note that this is out of a recent book that my co-director and I published together called Power Lines, The Human Cost of American Energy in Transition, where we have a full chapter, one on affordability and energy insecurity and another on access to technologies. And what we outline there is that access to these technologies is highly uneven across geography and socioeconomic group, and the barriers to adoption are more pronounced for certain groups. These are groups such as those who don't have a high tax incidence, so therefore they can't take advantage of the tax benefits, or households that don't have a parking space, for example, and can't put an electric vehicle there, or don't own their roof and can't put solar panels on their roof. We know that access to and contributions to government incentives is also uneven. And this is based on a study that came out several years ago, which essentially found that for both electric vehicle and residential solar tax programs, that there is a form of cross-subsidization where there's a disproportionate amount from middle to low-income households putting into these programs, where they're then flowing, these funds are flowing disproportionately to higher income households. We also know that access to different technologies is geographically constrained. For example, if you live in a rural community, you may not have access to a solar installer anywhere within a 100-mile radius. We also know that wealth begets wealth. So if you have a bigger house, more energy consumption, and more money, you can put in bigger solar panels, for example, which means you save a lot more energy. And you might also be able to afford storage, which means you also save even more energy. And then finally, we also know that given current market structures, these inequities of 1 through 5 could become even more pronounced in the future. And that is, if you consider residential again as the same example, if a decent proportion of a neighborhood or a community were to install residential solar, that means that there's that many less houses paying the full fixed cost for the electric grid. The utility still needs to recover those costs, and thereby those fixed costs are then pushed onto the customers that remain, who are typically the customers who are less able to afford the residential solar in the first place. And this becomes a cycle over time. Now, there's studies that find this in the case of solar, but also in the case of natural gas and gas, essentially residential infrastructure. And then I'll end in the policy category by thinking about customer protection policies, so disconnection protections. And these typically come in the form of temperature-based protections, seasonal-based protections, notification requirements, and protections for vulnerable groups. Now, also on our utility disconnection dashboard, we track all of these policies all across the United States. And we will soon release actually right now it's a cross-sectional data set and set of maps, but we'll soon release a historic set of data set where we can see the changes of these policies over time. This is just pulling out a map from our disconnection dashboard, where blue is those states that have just cold weather protections. Orange are states that have both heat-based protections and cold-based protections. And then the little contingencies, the asterisks in the hat, essentially show that there are caveats to whether a household can access these protections or has these protections in place. Oftentimes it's the case in several of these states that the state will say, you cannot be disconnected if it is between, I'll just give a hypothetical example, November and March, and the weather is below 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So the and essentially means that you have to have both conditions in place, as opposed to just a policy that says this, or a policy that just has one of these specifications. So if we consider all of these contingencies, the policies generally are weaker than they could be. Now, what are some opportunities? I think there's opportunities both for utility improvements as well as government improvements. Here for the utilities, we offer that utilities can clearly specify the minimum days of notice prior to disconnection and provide multiple forms of notification for households. And that might even include text messages, which is the most common way for households these days to receive information. Utilities can establish a date range when customers can pay their bills before being considered late or delinquent, and be very clear about these dates so that households don't essentially have to guess. And utilities can regularly provide information to their customers on their website, for example, and in their mailings as they send them out. We recommend at least twice annually. And there's government opportunities for enhancement here too. The first is easily understood and transparent language with few administrative burdens. As our team first started to dig into these different policies years ago, we were struck at how convoluted the language is about what is available and what isn't, particularly around some of the medical protections that are in place. I won't name a state, but just to kind of pick on an example, there's a state that has a protection for individuals who just gave birth. And so basically the idea is that if somebody gave birth, they need to get a doctor's notice if they anticipate that they will be in energy hardship sometime over the next 2 years. And that doctor's note needs to be signed before they leave the hospital. I think these are incredibly burdensome and require some degree of foresight that a household might not necessarily have, and during a time of their life that might be particularly complicated by other things, such as just having children. So I think that there's this great opportunity for making these policies much more direct and understandable. I think there's opportunities for enhancing the protections, both temperature-based protections and date-based protections. There's opportunities to broaden the definition of what are medical conditions that one may have that thereby allow them to be protected. There's an opportunity to expand protections to cover more households with children. As of right now, only 4 states have protections for households with young children, despite what I told you earlier about this very high incidence of disconnections for these households. There's an opportunity to establish a minimum arrearage amount before disconnections occur, and to think specifically about the renter community and what kinds of conditions they face vis-a-vis the owners of the households. And I'll also end just by noting that I don't think, maybe my schematic before suggested that much of the challenge of energy insecurity and unaffordability falls within the domain of the federal government and the state government exclusively, but I think we need to broaden our view here and note that there are many energy sector individuals or actors, including even households, that are a part of this story, and they all have different levers, is the term I use here in this paper. They all have different levers that they can pull to address energy insecurity in different ways. So state legislatures, I noted several before: weatherization, providing access and subsidies for distributed energy resources. Public utility commissions can also play a role. They can adopt explicit energy justice, or we could call it something else, energy equity, energy affordability principles in their rate making. Of course, affordability is a long-standing part of their decision making, but really thinking deeply about some of these dimensions, some of these challenges as they relate to justice and equity is where they can additionally adopt this mentality. Utilities can also, as they're planning for the future, they can pursue grid distribution planning that prioritizes affordability and reliability, and that facilitates interconnection of residential solar and other distributed energy resources. RTOs, regional transmission organizations, have a role to play in speeding along interconnection queues and being deeply involved with utilities in their planning processes. Same with FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They can mandate practices for transmission planning, interconnection procedures, and practices that deeply prioritize affordability. And local governments, as you all know, have a huge role to play in directing their communities toward the resources that exist, amending zoning ordinances to facilitate energy infrastructure siting, and providing a variety of emergency services such as cooling centers. Now, putting this all together, this is returning to that schematic that I had before. There are these preventative investments, temporary relief, long-term management. But then if we add the different levers for different actors, we can say there's also structural changes. I'll end maybe just with a shameless plug for the book that we recently released that I noted before. And in this book, we essentially put the challenge of energy insecurity and affordability into the context of our changing energy systems and some of the other challenges we're facing across our energy systems, such as technology access, which I mentioned before, but also legacy fossil fuel communities and some of the kind of economic development and social challenges of broadly our energy systems as they're evolving. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and I very much look forward to any and all questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Carly. We appreciate it, and that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I saw that in the chat we had a lot of questions. I do just want to remind everybody that we do have a hard stop for this topic at 11:20. So if you want to, I'm opening up the floor for people to start asking Dr. Carly questions. And I know, Valerie, you had one, and Allison, I believe you had one as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Valerie, you're muted. Valerie, you're still muted.
Maybe while we're waiting for
Oh,
Valerie, is it okay
okay.
if I jump? Oh,
Oh,
go
I
ahead,
bet
Valerie.
you
Sorry.
Technology is playing games with me this morning. Stop. Okay, so my question was, and I've seen this before, so I just wanted to confirm I heard you correctly, that sometimes when people think, oh, I put solar on my house, my building, whatever, that is taking away some of my costs. So I don't have to change how I use my energy, that I'm good. I don't have to reduce it. And I think you actually said that, maybe I misunderstood, but was households with solar less likely to reduce energy? Is that true? Like they feel like, well, it was the burden sort of was shifted, so I don't have to actually be more energy efficient because it's being covered by the solar. Did I understand correctly what you said?
There's a little bit of nuance here. I really appreciate your question. Thank you. I actually I didn't intend to suggest that there was a rebound effect. Now, because our study doesn't actually study a rebound effect. And the rebound is if something becomes more affordable, cheaper, then you can use more of it. And there are a lot of studies
Yeah.
that do find that there's a rebound effect with solar and with electric vehicles as examples. In our study, we're just finding that essentially it's reducing the bills for people. And as a result, they're less likely to be in a state of energy insecurity. Now, where I think there's additional nuances, if we remember the kind of the line graph that I gave about the different forms of energy insecurity and a high energy burden versus curtailment, it's really important to remember that a lot of these households might be heavily curtailing their energy use at the start. And so as a result of having something that becomes more affordable, they might actually start using more energy, not because they're over consuming, but because they're trying to put themselves back at a state where they're consuming the amount that is needed for them. Though our study specifically doesn't get into that detail.
Okay, because I was also surprised utility assistance was like 6%. And I mean, they can take more proactive approaches, just like putting foam in their electrical outlets or sealing things. And um, that's not necessarily, I understand what you're saying. They would actually maybe use more energy because they're actually using the kind of appliances or whatever that they weren't using before because they couldn't afford it. I get it. But I think that that's also a disconnect that they can help sort of themselves reduce it as well. But you answered my question about the solar, so thank you.
Yeah.
I found your study fascinating.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Allison, I don't know if you wanted to come off mute to give your comment. I can read it for you.
Oh, my question was answered with a subsequent slide, so I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. And then you also
Maybe
say,
could I jump in on that one, Allison? Because you asked about the durable medical equipment, and I just to add one additional detail. So as I noted, it can increase one's bill because they have to run these devices, right? And it can increase the bill by multiple hundred. But what's very interesting, I think, is the overlap with the healthcare system here in that when one is prescribed a durable medical equipment, oftentimes insurance will help with the payment, but the help is usually for the upfront costs of the equipment. It's not for the use of the equipment over time. And it's not necessarily in the doctor's frame of mind or purview to think by giving this person this life-saving device, I might be compromising their life because over the next several years, they will be spending so much more on their energy.
And Allison, you made a comment about the extreme heat versus the extreme cold. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, just a general comment that the LIHEAP preference for cold weather states seems to be a bit backwards, given that heat deaths are far more common than cold deaths. And with cold, you can always layer on more clothing. With heat, there's nothing you can do once you're in minimal clothing, and your organs are at risk.
I agree. I agree entirely. Yeah, it's very outdated, I would say. The policy is outdated in that regard.
We have another question in the chat. Katie, if you want to come off mute and ask your question. No? Okay,
oh,
the
well,
question is, oh, go ahead.
do you have any idea why folks don't ask for government assistance more often?
Yeah, our team has conducted a lot of interviews with households who have been disconnected, and I think these interviews have given great insights into why people don't necessarily seek government assistance and why they also don't call the utility company. In terms of government assistance, sometimes households don't know that it exists. They haven't encountered that information before. They also might face a certain stigma associated with taking government funds that they're not necessarily interested in having. They also might, depending on the state, there might be a significant amount of administrative burdens to actually accessing the government funds, where you might have to prove, for example, your assets, your wealth, provide social security number, provide a lot of information. Sometimes you have to show up in person in order to access this, and it doesn't necessarily align with your work hours, for example, or is too far away. And it's also, I lost my last one. Utility, though, I know you didn't ask about this, but why do people not necessarily reach out to the utility company? We also find that it's very hard for people to actually reach an individual on the other end of the line. And that's a frustration that I think is a theme that is in almost every interview we've ever conducted with people who have been disconnected, is that they just find that they can't actually get a human on the other end of the line. They end up in a kind of a robo cycle. And once they do have the human, it feels hard and shameful, which is the point I was actually going to make about the government. Is it can just be very shameful for a household to accept these funds. But it's also the case with the utility company that it's shameful to have another person who kind of sympathizes on the other end of the line, but doesn't necessarily, because of kind of the broader story. Also, on the point of government assistance, there are plenty of cases where a household doesn't want to or can't share their information with the government, that they might be undocumented, for example, and fearful of their circumstances, and so therefore don't seek out the government assistance route.
I've worked in that area, and I could tell you that one of the things that I noticed a lot of there were cultural and language barriers sometimes that also contributed to people not wanting to get government assistance, or not wanting to, just not knowing and not how to approach that.
Great point. Great point.
All right, I do have a question though. It goes back to the data. When you're talking about the shutoff data, my question was, is there a way to determine, or when they're talking about, data and they shut off because of non-payment, is there a way to determine whether it's because of non-payment or for other reasons, like let's say somebody was moving, or, they no longer own the house, or for whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Can it be distinguished?
It can, and in most of the data that's on our utility disconnection dashboard, it's due to non-payment, and it's reported very specifically that way. It's a little different with different utilities. The water industry, for example, the data that are reported there oftentimes doesn't distinguish between, and so it's very hard for water scholars and practitioners to get a sense of whether it's because people are moving or because they were delinquent on their payments.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions or comments for Dr. Carley?
Madam Chair, I'm not seeing anything in the chat or any hands. Oh, Matt Myers from Fairfax.
I
Matt,
was
you
just
want to come
gonna
off mute?
something. Yes. Good morning. This is Matt Myers, Fairfax County. Just something we've been looking at, as Virginia is now back in the regional greenhouse gas initiatives, and funds will be coming from that. We're looking at, and it's something we can talk with other folks in Virginia. That those RGGI funds fund the state program. So we're really looking as those funds will be. There's already money sitting there from when we left RGGI from previously, and now there's going to be a lot more funds starting in the first sale in September. So we're looking at ways how we better connect these programs to customers and the region. So this is something kind of building on your presentation, is, we're looking both making the system more efficient and how we can work with the state to do that, as well as the contractors. Some of these deliveries of these programs could take 12 to 18 months for a customer. And with this additional funds coming in, how can we all work together to help move those programs forward?
Excellent.
Thank you. All righty. Anybody else? Any other hands up?
So far, no other hands up or nothing else in the chat. Matt did put a link to Fairfax's program.
Thank you, Dr. Carly. We appreciate it. And we're early.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Carly.
All righty. We can move on to our next agenda item, which is data tracking analysis on electric and gas utility disconnections in the region. And that's going to be presented by Leah and Maddie, which is kind of funny because there's Maddie, which is me, and Maddie, which is Cog. Anyway, so I'm just going to let Maddie and Leah take it away, and then we'll have questions and answers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think the theme is today, like you'll hear a lot of some elements of the same information presented throughout the primer, Dr. Carly's presentation, as well as what we will present here. So there's a theme. So as the chair noted, this is a new area of research and data tracking that we've just started. So the information presented today is preliminary and not an official area of data tracking for COG as with our utility tracking and greenhouse gas emissions tracking. So this is a new area for us. So that said, our effort to address the broader area of energy equity, energy affordability, and environmental justice across sort of our multi-level committee formation within COG goes back to the 2017, 2018 time frame when we were looking at, we introduced equity emphasis areas as a COG-wide planning tool, sort of integrating that across transportation, because it initially started as a transportation planning tool, but then we integrated it across housing, climate, and energy. And as you see in our 2030 plan, we have equity integrated throughout all of those measures. But for the purposes of today, we'll look more recently at our last November when we had, as Dr. Carly mentioned, her co-director of the Energy Justice Lab present at ACPAC. He didn't actually present here at BX, so now we have his co-presenter here today, but the Energy Justice Lab presented at ACPAC in November, and that is the Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee. And then also last November, again, we mentioned the LIHEAP funding was in jeopardy. And to address that issue at the November BAC meeting, we pulled together a panel to discuss the status of LIHEAP and funding alternatives. So we had the National Energy Assistance Directors Association. We had representatives from area utilities, including PEPCO, Dominion, and SMECO, and then also representatives from the state offices that administer the energy assistance programs. So LIHEAP, as Dr. Carly illuminated, that was essentially at that time, the LIHEAP funding was released, but it's fair to say that the state and local agencies' ability to fund energy assistance programs are more difficult. They have to be stretched more across more vulnerable communities. So we're introducing this topic more so to sort of figure out policy interventions to support energy affordability. And then in January 2026, we republished the Environmental Justice Toolkit, which put forth community engagement strategies. We also thought it was important to recommend policies and metrics that are rooted in removing the historical energy burdens across frontline communities. And the toolkit is posted in the chat. So if you would like to take a look at that. And then also at last April BX meeting, we had a presentation on energy affordability, looking at utility revenue, capacity markets, and cost to customers. So next slide, please. And so today we're digging more into the weeds, looking at utility disconnection trends as we see energy affordability becoming more of an issue across income class. We're covering utility disconnections nationwide, as you see here, by state and the COG region. The two main data sources are the Energy Equity Project, which was launched back in 2021 by the University of Michigan. And back in 2022, BEAC did have the EEP, which I'll call moving forward for the Energy Equity Project, moving forward, the EEP. We did have them present back in 2022 their initial framework. So at some point, I think we should have them back. And then the primary source of data for this presentation is the Energy Justice Labs Utility Disconnection Dashboard, which Dr. Carly mentioned. And so the nationwide data is from the EEP, and they get their data from EIA. And so the state data is from the Utility Disconnection Dashboard, with the emphasis that it is only for utilities within the COG region, not utility disconnections across the entire state footprint for Maryland and DC. But what we see here, as Dr. Carly mentioned or noted, that there were 15 million shutoffs in 2024. That does include combined disconnections for electric and gas, with 13.4 for electric and gas 1.7. And so there was only 17% of those households that never were reconnected nationwide. And so for DC, we're looking at close to 15,000 household disconnections, with a distribution of close to 12,000 households for electric and 3,000 for gas. And then for they did have reconnection rate of 53%. So that's pretty, I guess you could say pretty good, 50%. But if you're thinking about a test, that's not so good if you got a 50. So, but last year, 50%, over 50% of there were total reconnections, with a distribution of a little over 6,000 for electric and a little over 1,000 for gas. Next slide, please. And for Maryland, again, this is for the COG region utilities, which Maddie will go over, but we're looking at a total of 50,000 total reconnections, with close to 43,000 for electric and 7,400 for gas. There was a combined 83% of households that were reconnected, and that's again for the utilities in our region. So that's a B, I guess you would say. And then for Virginia, again, there were close to 375,000 total disconnections, with the majority looking at electric disconnections and a few for gas disconnections. We don't have reconnections for Virginia. Virginia is not required to share reconnection data. And next slide is up for Maddie.
Yes, so to go over the data, we wanted to give a little bit of context beforehand, and I know Dr. Carly addressed this, but just to reemphasize, when we're discussing disconnections with our data, we're specifically talking about utilities that have chosen to disconnect customers due to non-payment. And all of the data that we're using in the following visuals are coming from the EJ Labs Utility Disconnection Dashboard, which, as Dr. Carly mentioned, is gathered from utility reports that are required for the state reporting. And so the data is only available by state and utility company, so we're not able to only pull disconnection data that occurred in COGS jurisdictions that's made up of cities and counties, but we are able to narrow it down to the utilities that operate in our jurisdictions in Maryland and Virginia. And of course, we expect our DC data to be complete. And then while our data does not specify any of the locations or any qualities or identifiers of customers that are disconnected, as Dr. Carly talked about, it's clearly an environmental justice and equity issue. And so at the end, we have a few additional slides regarding energy burden that we won't be going over, but you can look at later. So now to get into the data, we'll first look at DC. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. And so on the left is the total sum of disconnections for each year from 2014 to 2024 for DC. And on the right, we have the number of reported reconnections for electric utilities. So on all of these visuals, you'll see a low point in 2020, 2021 due to the emergency utility shutoff moratoria that happened with COVID-19 in all of these areas. And you can see with DC that shutoffs were kind of going on a downward trend pre-COVID, but since then they have been back on the rise. And what we found most interesting with this data is you can see that both disconnections and reconnections are following the same trend. However, the gap between the two appear to be growing. So in 2016, there's a reconnection rate of about 87.5%, with in 2024 it being 53.8%. So it appears to us that more people are unable to catch up on their payments and less people are being reconnected. And in the next slide, we'll be talking about Maryland's disconnections, which Maryland, it appears that disconnections were steadily rising pre-COVID and now post-COVID as well. And then we can see reconnections are following a similar pattern as well. However, we don't see as large of a reconnection gap as we do with DC. In 2016, the reconnection rate was almost 89%, and in 2024, it's 83.6%. So not quite as bad, but still a growing gap. And then in our next slide, we have data for Virginia's electric disconnections. We can see that for Virginia, the disconnections were relatively stable, I would say, from year to year until we have a big jump in 2024. And as Leah mentioned, Virginia's data is a little different because they are not required to report reconnections in the state. And so to try to learn a little bit more about Virginia despite not having reconnections, we decided to look at the median monthly number of disconnections. So we expect that disconnections are a bit seasonal, with some seasons having more extreme heat and more energy use needed. And so by taking the median, that would remove the seasonality, and we could see the approximate general number of disconnections by month. And so you can see on the right with the median graph that the median disconnections were a lot higher in monthly in 2017 and 2018. So we expect that this is because of extreme temperatures in certain months. And so even though we have more disconnections in 2024, the median is lower. And so I think this builds on what Dr. Carly mentioned in her presentation, that with climate change, temperatures are kind of becoming more extreme out of seasons that we would expect. And so we're seeing disconnections being spread out more evenly across the year. So even though it's lower, disconnections are overall higher. And so it appears that people are struggling more throughout the year rather than just at certain times. And then in our next slide, we looked specifically at gas disconnections. And you can see that in all three areas, gas appears to be on a downward trend. This was very surprising to us initially because gas is obviously very volatile in its pricing. And we can't easily confirm why disconnections are on a downward trend. However, we have considered that it may be due to the increasing number of households that are switching from gas to electric power. And if that is the case, it's important to note that while disconnections in gas may be going down, electric disconnections are still increasing in all areas. So people are definitely still being disconnected regardless of this downward trend with gas. And on to the next slide, just to recap everything that we learned from the data. We saw that utility disconnections are steadily rising, especially in electricity, especially since COVID-19 era moratoria have come to an end. And our data ends in 2024, so we haven't yet seen any data that relates to the current utility price hikes that we're experiencing in the area. And so we can't comment on how that will affect disconnections, but we think that that's an important area for jurisdictions to continue watching in the future. And as I mentioned, we did see a consistent gap between disconnections and reconnections, showing that customers are not immediately being reconnected. As I mentioned, Virginia is showing a median that is different since pre-COVID, showing that disconnections are happening more often throughout the year, and gas disconnections are on that downward trend. And I'll pass it off to Leah now.
And so finally, we wanted to pose these concluding questions for the committee to think through as part of the Q&A. I do think it's important for us to begin to think, and this is a theme throughout Dr. Carly's presentation, to think of energy insecurity and affordability as a societal issue rather than just impacting certain types of populations based on low income level and other determinants or vulnerabilities. Energy assistance programs are one way to help address the expanding instability for households. But as mentioned, the Environmental Justice Toolkit that we just published did put forth some policy interventions. Some of them Dr. Carly mentioned, but in that piece, we put forth eliminate utility shutoff penalties and reconnection fees, the past utility debt cancellation policy, ban utility shutoffs for at-risk populations during extreme weather at the state and federal level, if they could do that, and then stop utilities from selling debt to credit collection businesses. Well, stop utilities from selling debt to credit collection businesses. That is a thing that is happening as well. Again, the EJ Toolkit is posted in the chat. And Madam Chair, that ends our presentation, and we can open it up for any questions or comments.
Alrighty. So let's see. Is there any questions in the chat regarding your topic? I don't see any.
And I will say this, I'll add that from the Energy Equity Project, they do track the for 2024 peak utility shutoffs for the year. So for example, for DC, electric utility shutoffs peaked in May 2024. And for gas, it peaked in March. And for Maryland, electric utility shutoffs peaked in October of 2024. And then for gas, it peaked in April of 2024. And then in Virginia, electric shutoffs peaked in May. And for gas, both in Virginia, it peaked for electric and gas shutoffs in May of 2024, which is it's interesting that it peaked both in May for both gas and electric.
I'm just wondering, I was thinking through, because this goes to 2024, right? The data,
Yes.
and I'm wondering what 2025 is going to look like. And given the federal, shutdowns and and the restructuring at the federal level, what that's going to look like for the statistics in terms of shutoffs.
Yeah, again,
Utilities. It's going to be interesting.
EIA just released their 2024 data, so we probably a year in
before we'll see the
coming for the 2025. And I see that Maya had her hand up, and then we do have a comment in the chat. So Maya, you want to come off mute?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Leah, and thanks for the presentation. I think this presentation and Dr. Carly's presentation were really informative and interesting, and I don't expect you all to have answers to this, but while you were presenting, it just made me think, how are these disconnections and the years of these disconnections associated with weather? Is it a brutal cold winter and the natural gas bills, and so there's going to be more people less likely to pay their bills, and are these programs that are in place to help those who are struggling with their energy bills? Like, is there foresight into that? Like, it's about to be a brutal winter, we're going to need to put more money into this program to help with bill assistance or anything like that. But that's just what I was wondering. And I see that Valerie was pointing out the shutoff period. Like, you know, if there's a shut off in May, it could have been caused by, you know, really hot, really colder weather in March or something like that. So just that was just sort of like my thought process of like questions that came in my head as you guys were talking about that.
I was thinking the same thing,
Yeah.
regarding, is there some way that, that they can do a correlation between, what they think, the weather predictions and what is in the funding and how they can, you know, um, get ahead of the curve when it comes to shutting down. I do know one thing I can tell you about BG&E, and we're going to see a shift in probably cutoffs soon, is because BG&E just lifted their moratorium on shutoffs. So when we start looking at statistics later on, we're going to see that that's going to be an impact.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and noting the lower moratoriums like around the pandemic, weren't there, I mean, lower shutoffs during the pandemic, weren't there moratoriums in place during the pandemic that might have
Yes.
influenced that? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then we didn't include in this data because we didn't want to kind of cross over with too much difference in data, but the Energy Equity Project does include, they have what their latest study is called a tsunami of shutoffs, and they are tracking final shutoff notices. And so speaking to your point in terms of like you may get a shutoff notice a month or two before, and then it leads up to the actual shutoff 2 months later. So, that is another data tracking point, and then that could also, again, correlate to seasonal causes or changes in weather or extreme weather cases. So again, this is something that we're just starting to actually track. We've been looking at it for some time, but we do want to now have something more develop more concrete for for essentially BAC, but as well as like the COG region. This is something that we're thinking through. So if you have ideas and thoughts on what we've presented thus far in terms of the primer, what to include, how to build it out, what other metrics or data points that you want us to track or start tracking, we'll think that through. I do want to say we do have other official tracking data points which you all are recipients of, but this is something again we're trying to hopefully will build out in the future. And
I see Valerie's hands up.
Valerie, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to repeat kind of what Maya, you got what I was saying in there, is I really think it's important that there needs to be a correlation between that cutoff period, which seemed like, I'm going to be specific, Virginia was 60 days, and a lot of that was true for the other states as well, that event that causing that precipitating is obviously happening prior to that. So linking that to what's going on, like it was extremely hot or extremely cold, I think is a really important point to bring in there and to pursue, because then if you can see that happening, then you can anticipate that. And I mean, I know that it was asked, why do we not have more government assistance, why people don't ask for it? And I think the answer to that is pretty obvious, but I don't understand utility one though, because they do have programs. So I don't know if that's a lack of communication or people don't realize it, or they're making it difficult to access that. Because I mean, in our city, we do a lot with trying to get people to sign up and to participate. So if we knew better what the sticking point was, that we could emphasize that more, that would be helpful to us to make sure that our programs are being more effective, because Dominion is offering it. We're not trying to understand why maybe that people are not taking it. And we've had a lot of discussions with Dominion, and some of the things that they do don't make it easy for people to get information. So if that is a sticking point and we already have that conversation going on, maybe we can just add on to it and try to move the needle a little bit further forward.
And I think Dr. Carly did speak to those other drawbacks, which could be seen as cultural, impacts or barriers. So that could also lead to why we see community members or residents not taking a better advantage of the limited energy assistance programs that utilities offer.
Just
And
usually
then
when
again,
util
those barriers.
sorry. I was just
Mhm.
going to say, usually utilities, they'll offer assistance versus the government. It's usually more quiet, and your neighbors wouldn't necessarily know about it unless you shared it or people. Whereas government has a tendency to ask more questions, so it might be more publicly noticeable. I'm not totally
Yeah.
sure about that. I think that's um,
Well, I mean, if you're thinking about it being publicly available or noticeable to other neighbors, but still just between the utility and the household, they may feel there's still a barrier to providing certain types of information. And as Dr. Colley mentioned, they may see this, well, utility giving information in terms of like immigration status, things like that. It's still
yeah,
part of the the state apparatus, you would
yeah.
say, although
No,
it's not n-
yeah.
directly connected. So there's
And
those sorts of things.
particularly in, without getting into too deep, particularly in this environment, I could totally appreciate someone being very reticent to give any information unless they absolutely have to. So I get it. So maybe there's even a way for a safe way to provide that so they're not so invasive and they can't use that information in other ways. And I might understand why they wouldn't want to do that 100%.
Yeah, especially now.
Especially, yeah. Again, I'm not trying to
Especially
get to a
now.
deep political discussion, but it kind of
No.
like, you sort of understand. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you get the point.
I do want to intercede with one thing. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations that do also contribute, have programs that will help people with their utilities. I know that the Salvation Army has a very robust program, and so we want to look outside just what the government does and what the utility also do, and look at nonprofit organizations because there's quite a few of them. And I know that in some places, if you have gone through the whole process of the Salvation Army, it's easier for you to get funding from the utilities. I believe it's Washington Gas. If you've already gone through the intake process at the Salvation Army, Washington Gas doesn't even bother to do anything. So there are alternatives. And this may be a more non-invasive way of getting assistance. I know the Catholic Charities, there's quite a few organizations that do this. So,
And then
um,
true, when I was looking at this for our November meeting and did like internal research on the breadth of energy assistance programs, it's not clear that, the programs that are offered by the state and or utility, because a lot of times they are hand in hand. Um, is that is there a limit in terms of how many times a household can take advantage or use these assistance programs in a year, in 6 months? If you take advantage of this program, you're not able to take advantage of another program. How many incidences of disconnections are in a year, which would mean they would have to take advantage of assistance again? Is there a dollar cap, a number cap? So there's a lot of those questions may have answers to that, but I, I, we were not at the time, and I was not at the time able to uh, outline all that information. But those are other outstanding things that we should consider in terms of barriers to assistance.
I see there's two comments in the chat. If Katie or Allison want to speak to them.
Oh, I was just chiming in that Salvation Army's assistance is also capped at $500 and usually a one-time assistance, and it's very difficult to qualify for. Lots of questions, very thorough application process. So that can be a barrier for folks. We also did an analysis of all the various energy assistance programs that are available. We found 32 programs, and then we're creating like a partners portal, or not a partners portal, sorry, like a web navigator where people can answer a series of easy questions and figure out which programs they qualify for.
That's awesome. Do you think you could share the link to that, Allison?
Yes, when it's ready, absolutely. It's still
okay.
in the sandbox mode,
I
but
like that idea.
we'll definitely send it out. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if it was like a one-stop shop that, folks or households can use or to access, and then as Allison said, mention or do a check off in terms of the household needs, and then they can direct them to all the assistance programs that are out there. I think multiple access points can, if a person is going through or household is going through a hard time in terms of utility shutoffs and other life issues, then that could be a barrier as well, and they don't take advantage of the assistance programs.
All right, Leah, I'm not seeing any more questions or any comments. We're getting close to.
Yeah, we're on time. Well, we're early, but we were expected to end at 11:45.
Yeah, we're trying to give everybody 15 minutes back. All right. If nobody else has any more comments, before I adjourn, I do know that COG staff has some announcements. So Leah.
Yeah. So the 2026 Climate and Energy Leadership Awards program is almost coming to a close. It's been open since April 22nd, or Earth Day, to June 30th. You do have a climate and energy packet that was made available via email and on the committee or page or website. Please send it out, get your applications in. Again, it's for across 5 main categories: local government or government, for state, for large and small governments, NGO, business and for-profit, and educational. So there'll be 5 awards this year, assuming that everyone gets their applications in again. So please get them in to staff or me by June 30th.
Thank you, Leah. So our next meeting is September 17th. If you guys have any topics that you want addressed by the end of this year, you can either reach out to Leah or to myself, and we will incorporate them. Thank you to everybody who participated, and have a wonderful 3-day weekend. And meeting is adjourned.